The big problem with Lucasfilm and Star Wars. A point of conversation that will be talked about for years to come, with where it has been lately, but also what could potentially come of it in the future. Star Wars is my favorite entertainment IP, and I have not been happy with the direction it has gone in from a business perspective lately. In this video, I am going to explain what that big problem is with the studio and how it is handling the IP of Star Wars. So that big problem is pretty much what my thumbnail describes, and that is what I call a lack of focus. Lucasfilm as a company right now, in my personal opinion, has no self-awareness to what the franchise is representative of, but also with what has come before and what could come in the future. In a way, I compare it to a dysfunctional sports team that is tanking their way to a really bad season, not making playoffs, and sadly missing out on a potential championship. There seems to be a lack of focus and attention around the key players on the team that Lucasfilm has brought in to make success on the field, and there's also a lack of focus and attention from the general manager and owner, who seemingly might have too much control at the end of the day and don't let the personnel and those players do their jobs in creating a great environment to go out and find success on the field. It is an issue that has plagued this company for a long time now, since the new leadership came in with the likes of Kathleen as studio head. She's definitely not the only issue with this company and IP right now, but she is definitely headlining it in many regards. As someone who lives around several sports teams where one is not controlled by the owner and the other one is, I'll leave it up to you to decipher which one is finding success and the other is not. Lucasfilm is seemingly the one company under Disney, by the way, that is finding the worst of troubles with this, and I'm going to shock you all with an opinion that I have a feeling will get me shouted at for, but I don't care, because it's truly what I believe. Disney is not the problem with Star Wars as the internet says it is to be. It is mainly Lucasfilm. To be clear, I'm not saying that Disney is not at fault for the direction that Star Wars has gone in some areas, but they are certainly not the main villain. I think that label can go more towards Lucasfilm as a singular company under its own current leadership. With all the other properties and studios that Disney does own, you'll find that those are seemingly doing a lot better, but also have much more self-awareness to them with knowing what the problems are and how to fix them. Marvel recently has completely moved off the whole quantity over quality narrative that under the recent leadership of Bob Chapek was a mandate and was hurting them. The stories of the multiverse saga were also an issue, but overall, the quantity over quality mandate really hurt them. They saw that and they are now making changes to multiple different projects, television and movies. Pixar under Chapek recently suffered from the notion that animation would not be a main priority for them, at least from a theatrical perspective, and it would be more of a streaming thing. Another mistake that they made, and are now trying to course correct that as well. Disney also now owns 20th Century Studios, a company known for owning classic sci-fi IPs like Alien and Predator as examples to use, where the most recent films have found success in good quality and fans coming out to support them. Franchises that most people would have assumed were gone, but are now being brought back to life in the best way that the best people working on them are making good quality films. And yet, Lucasfilm is the one company under Disney that, as I use this word again, seemingly completely failed to have that self-awareness of their current situation. At this point, the only real blame on Disney I can give to them with this situation is to look at what Bob Iger is doing to let this keep going. That is the main guy at the top of Disney right now who was brought back to help clean up a bunch of the things with the company's owned properties after Chapek's time as CEO, but Star Wars is one that he hasn't really touched. I get that he might have a lot on his plate right now to handle, but that is just no excuse to say that his focus should be on everything else while leaving Lucasfilm and Star Wars out of it. But with that aside, I now want to address the actual IP of Star Wars itself that factors into a much bigger conversation, and this is in thanks to an article from The Hollywood Reporter that came out on November 12th titled Star Wars Movies Race for Rey and the Future of the Franchise on the Big Screen. The article details information that is not surprising with where the company of Lucasfilm is at and how they see the IP of Star Wars. There are several points I want to speak to, and the first one revolves around an issue that stimulates the notion of having a self-aware look on what works and what doesn't. There are numerous Star Wars movies being developed that overlap characters or timelines. So this point relates to another issue that we are seeing big name IPs suffer from recently. It is this idea that everything has to connect in with each other, and essentially almost give people this mindset that they have to watch everything to know everything. It's not a very organic way of speaking to an audience with how you would want them to consume all the media that you create. Granted, Star Wars is vastly consumed by the lore that it has created so far, to where practically everything connects in some manner, so there is not much it can really do from that perspective, but it's another thing entirely if you just try too hard to make sure that it is all connected. Many storylines in Star Wars don't really need the same characters and details all the time. I think with where the IP is at right now, this would be a grave mistake, and you'd be overstepping your boundaries. Make the stories organically, and then eventually over time, you could say that things would make sense for it all to connect with each other. Let's talk about the character of Rey now, which leads into this next point in the article, where it is stated that sources close to Lucasfilm are saying that she is the most important and valuable cinematic asset, in some ways maybe the only one Star Wars has right now. I am always upfront and honest about my opinions on things, and the character of Rey is one that I do like, and I love Daisy Ridley. I really thought that she did an amazing job with that character. However, I would be lying if I didn't say that this was one of the most misguided things I've read in a long time. The term cinematic asset comes off as one of the most corporate-sounding buzzword phrases I have ever heard. It almost sounds even more degrading to give it to any character, no matter if it was Rey or anyone else like the Mandalorian and Grogu, who some might consider that to actually be the current cinematic asset of Star Wars. I do think that Rey should be probably included more into Star Wars, but not to the degree that it feels like Lucasfilm wants her to be in. I get that she headlined the last trilogy and you want to continue her story, but making her a focal point given the backlash she got from being in the last trilogy might not be the best angle to go through with to start movies back up. If you wanted to just make one movie with her to start up back her story, that's a good move, and when the original film of hers was announced, I was open-minded about it. But now, with this news coming out of multiple films with her in it, I just feel like, again, you are overplaying your cards to a degree where you'll just eventually run out of chips to play. How many stories could she possibly connect in with, given that she doesn't really have too many ties with so many characters who are still alive now in her current timeline? Just food for thought when discussing this topic. The next several points revolve around a conversation of dysfunction and again lack of focus between the creatives and the higher-ups. In the article, there is a point made that some directors at the company are aware of what others are working on while others are not. Now, in hindsight, there is actually a world where this is not as big of a deal as it would be made to be. But when you are dealing with a franchise IP like this one that is currently heavily involved with interconnecting stories between its television shows and movies, this feels like a very big problem. For example, the new show Skeleton Crew, which is premiering at the beginning of next month, is supposedly rumored to have some form of a connection with the Mandalorian timeline of characters. We know this already given that it takes place in that stretch of years, and some of the characters in that show have had interactions with the Mandalorian himself, Din Djarin. If the directors on this show are not aware of what's going on with the director of the new Mandalorian and Grogu movie, which is Dave Filoni, then how are they working to establish reasonable and sound connections between the two? This is just one example, as it states here in the article. There are other film directors working on projects, or at least have been announced to work on projects for Star Wars, but yet have no idea about where the development of them is going. It is a classic case of potentially having too many cooks in the kitchen at once. You are having this quantity over quality mentality that is also feeding over into the actual directors themselves with how you also want to connect everything in. You're just stretching yourself way too thin, and that's just never going to work. Lucasfilm is also establishing a more religious tone to their framing of the timelines with how the directors and executives look at where each film and television show line up. It's a process that is seemingly confusing everyone to where no one is able to agree on anything, and second guessing happens way too much for them. This point also connects in with the fact that the article establishes that the company is wavering on the idea of the Skywalker saga and what it means to them that they would consider making more films around that character name. A lot of the Star Wars timeline that we as fans know, at least when it's happened on the big screen, is centered around the name of Skywalker, and I think at this point they are shooting themselves in the foot to continue that. This also then factors in with the next dysfunctional point of the company, which is where I truly started to get annoyed, and that is the fact that they consider Star Wars as a nostalgia-based enterprise and that they are running out of ideas to create said nostalgia. So this is where I officially go off on a rant, because as I mentioned up top, I am a diehard and hardcore Star Wars fan. I love this franchise dearly, to where it has given me some of the best moments of my life with entertainment media exposure. My brother was a diehard fan as well, and to this day, I can't thank him enough for getting me more into this franchise. I don't think I ever would have imagined that we would have gotten to the point where it would get this bad, to where Lucasfilm themselves don't truly even know what their own brand is and how big it is for that matter. Are you guys ready to hear the point that needs to be made? Because clearly nobody else is saying it enough. Star Wars is no longer run by people who understand what it means to run a creative business versus just being an actual business. What I mean by that is that it is run by shareholders and bankers who are only ever looking for the bottom line on what will make them the most amount of money and whatever it is that the data is telling them to look for in storytelling. Spectacle over character development, quantity versus quality, or nostalgia over newness, and so on. This is why, to go back to one of the points I mentioned from this article, they describe the character of Rey as a cinematic asset. That translates to character that will make me money, because whether people like it or not, the sequel trilogy made billions of dollars, and those were the last set of films that they released with the character of Rey headlining all three. They must believe that if they continue that process again, they are going to make a lot of money. They are completely wrong about that, because that's not a good frame for how you run an entertainment media business. They are missing out on so much expansive stuff that Star Wars has created since it first began, within the lore, books, games, and so on. I think this article makes it pretty obvious to even just the general casual fan that you don't have their best interest in mind right now. Hardcore fans like myself are probably going to stick on with you for the time being, but even then, over time, you might lose someone like me. As much as I have enjoyed probably more of what Lucasfilm has done under Disney than I have not, I still recognize the problems that it's suffering from, and a lot of that is due to the fact that right now, Kathleen Kennedy needs to move on from her position as head of the company. I've been saying it for years, but obviously everybody here knows she is lauded as one of the greatest film producers in history. Her record and filmography shows as much, and I don't think you can even deny that. However, I have been saying that she is treating the studio head position too much like a producer, to where that is why it feels like she is having way too much control over every single thing that goes on, to the point where you're not even acting like a studio head anymore. You are truly just acting like a producer. I'm not saying that she can't have a say in what happens with certain projects, because at the end of the day, she is who you go to for approval on this stuff. She has approved a lot of Star Wars that I love and enjoy, but you have to let the creatives actually do their job in most instances and trust them to make the stories that you want to be told. And to that point, stop announcing stuff with these filmmakers and creatives before you actually get the scripts done with them and you finalize what the plan is. This was the sequel trilogy's biggest mistake. They essentially just winged it from the start after Force Awakens and did not get any of the filmmakers and writers on board to make a cohesive trilogy. Ever since then, it's been the same damn thing every year under Kathleen Kennedy. A project gets announced, the filmmaker then leaves, or the filmmaker doesn't have a script done yet, or creative differences split them up, and so on and so on. You have hired some really talented filmmakers over the last however many years to make stuff for you, and I just find it hilarious that you have yet to get even half that list on board with what it is that you're trying to do and keep them to make the stuff that they wanted to do. Again, look at what the article is stating. It all lines up and it makes sense. It has happened way too many times at this point, to where someone has to be pointing the fingers at what is to blame. Right now, I'm looking at Kathleen Kennedy and Bob Iger for this. Either get your shit together, plan stuff out, and get on the same page, or management is just going to have to move on. I can't imagine how Dave Filoni, of all people, feels about this, as well as the now CCO of the company. He handles a lot of the creative decisions on projects moving forward, and I can't imagine how pigeonholed he is into these situations. Again, we bring up the sports comparison. If a team is not doing well and the players are not happy, who is the first person that usually gets fired? It's either the head coach or the general manager. Right now, the general manager controls everything, and even when that doesn't work, you then look to the owner. These two are who we need to be looking at right now for the blame of all of this. I'm somebody who is not one of those Kathleen Kennedy haters who basically makes their entire identity around that. I think that stuff gets ridiculous way too much, and it doesn't criticize her for the right reasons. But at this point, I can't defend her much more when it comes to how she is handling running an entertainment business. So with all that being said, I wanted to give some final thoughts to what the goal of this video was at the end of the day. It was strictly just to address where my frustration is with a franchise I love so dearly after this recent news came out where it was the final straw for me in some regard. To that point, if anybody here was coming into this video expecting that I would be throwing out culture war buzzword phrases or any of that other stupid crap that I see too many content creators do nowadays, then you would have been mistaken. I have not stooped to that low where I see too many people go to these days. I am not naming names, but it just feels like a lot of content creators' voices in this space don't truly know how to communicate reasonably and effectively about the issues that this franchise is really suffering from. They'd rather grift off contrived reasons that only play to a certain side of a fandom that, while small, have a big voice. I'm not that kind of person, nor do I ever want to play that kind of role, because I don't believe in building a personality off that. I only believe in what I believe in, and I also say it for what it is based on my own true beliefs, and not what some misguided YouTuber wants me to think. If we don't actually discuss the issues properly, then we're never going to get anywhere. I laid out a lot of the reasons why in this video that I have a problem with Lucasfilm and how they are treating Star Wars, and I probably have missed a bunch of points that I wanted to discuss. I feel like a lot of that could be done for another video, but for the time being, this was mainly to be centered around that article that came out a couple weeks ago. I think that Star Wars could be doing more in other areas that are not even television and movies, like with video games, for example. I don't think people truly realize how big of an effect video games have had on this franchise when they first started getting made around it. I believe they elevated Star Wars in name way more than people think, which makes sense because video games are the biggest form of entertainment there is, and it feels like even there, they are not doing enough. I'm excited for Andor Season 2. The first season of Andor is one of my favorite single seasons of television I've ever watched. I'm curious to see what Skeleton Crew is going to be like as this story that follows these young kids in their own space adventure. I'm excited for the third season of Visions coming next year as well, and then after that, we'll probably get the first film in a long time with The Mandalorian and Grogu in 2026. I'm really hoping for the best in that film, and the filmmakers behind it I know are people who are passionate and love what they do. That article from The Hollywood Reporter certainly did no service to get people back into Star Wars, but if they can course correct on it and move on from the current management of Kathleen Kennedy and the shareholders that are in control right now, I think they have a chance to really do something good with the brand in the future. So there you have it. That's my commentary on the state of Lucasfilm and Star Wars. If anyone here is curious to see me make more videos like this, then let me know. I'm not a Star Wars channel, even though it used to be at one point, but I do genuinely love talking about this IP. I've made a couple other videos on this channel around Star Wars that are some of my biggest videos that I've ever made on YouTube, so I highly recommend you go check those out. What do you all think? Leave your comments down below on what you think about my commentary of this video topic, and let's have a nice and respectful conversation about it. I can't ask enough that you please be respectful and reasonable, especially since I know that this franchise has a very divisive fan base at the moment. Thank you all for stopping by my channel. If you want to see more moving forward from me with regards to film and television and you enjoyed this video, hit the like button and subscribe if you are new here and turn on that notification bell. I'm trying to build a community on here and your support would be greatly appreciated. That's a wrap, folks. I hope you all have a wonderful rest of the day, and I will see you all soon for the next video.